The Switch 2! The Direct has happened! I was streaming it, and I even had a lot of questions even during the stream, but little did I know just how overwhelming that information was gonna be, and, well, kind of part of the message that I've been thinking is Nintendo actually turning into the Apple of gaming? Today, I'm gonna dissect that a little bit by going over kind of a little bit of a Cliff Notes version of the Direct, and even diving into much of the controversy. That's gonna include areas where I agree, areas where I disagree, and areas where there's certain misinformation that I am going to debunk right here. It's a lot, so let's dissect this right now, shall we? What is going on, everybody? This is Dylan of DSL Media, and today I am going to dive into, well, much of what has been going on about the Switch 2. And all I have to say is, so much to process. It feels like every single day there is so much information, some of which is good, and a lot of it is not so great. Now, last thing I did on my channel really was that I streamed the Switch 2 Direct. I streamed it the very moment it went live, which means I got to experience moments where Nintendo's stream was crashing. Nintendo? I think your stream is drunk. I can't tell what's happening now. I can't tell what's happening. Nintendo, fix your stream! Ho, that was a hell of a ride right there. And I gave my live reaction to it, gave much of my reaction to each of the games that was dropped, and even during the stream, the information was overwhelming. I mean, I am excited for the system overall. There was some great announcements to come out during the Direct, and I have considered setting up a pre-order. Either way, though, I have been processing my mind a whole lot about it in the weeks that the Direct has ended, but I certainly was not prepared for the roller coaster that was about to come afterwards, cause, hoo boy, to say that things have been so divisive with the Switch 2 would be a bit of an understatement. It just feels like every day there is something that emerges about the Switch 2 that is not particularly good news, to say the very least. And much of my thoughts have been changing pretty much every day. Like, my opinions, even a month from now, may end up being different. Like, I've been going back and forth as to whether or not I want to pre-order the system. My plan was that I was going to do what I initially did when I pre-ordered the Switch 1, and that is drop a little bit of money for a reserve at GameStop, just incrementally putting money over time, and pick up the system at launch day. I've been a bit on the fence as to whether I'd want to do that with the Switch 2. I'm sure some of y'all who clicked on this video might know where I'm going with that part. But there is going to be some things that I am going to defend the Switch 2 on, and there's going to be some things where I'm going to talk about where I agree with the controversy. So, starting with the games that were revealed during the Switch 2 Direct, without going too much into it, they started with Mario Kart World, and that got its own dedicated Direct, and it looks fun. I was actually impressed with much of what that game showed off. It's really interesting that they're giving that game a more open-world sandbox. There was also a new Hyrule Warriors game revealed, which I actually forgot about until I rewatched part of the Direct for this video. And we have Kirby Air Riders coming out. Yep, the new Kirby Air Ride game that Sakurai is developing. Oh yes, and since we're talking about first-party games, then this is probably a good time to start with this really stupid decision. And that is the Switch 2 Welcome Tour game. Yeah, this is the first in one of the many controversial aspects about the Switch 2 that I'm going to be talking about in this video, and one I actually agree with because, yes, I do find this to be absolutely ridiculous. But also, I think anyone who says that they're charging $10 for a tech demo is being way too kind. Because I would hardly even call this a tech demo. I would call this a virtual manual. That's what Welcome Tour looks like to me, a freaking manual for the Switch 2 that just shows a user guide for what's inside the system. Like, imagine paying $10 extra for an NES game. This is actually Legacy of the Wizard. I'm using that because I actually have the instruction manual for that. And you gotta pay $10 extra for the instruction manual. That is the equivalent to what they're doing with Switch 2 Welcome Tour right here. And people bring up how Wii Sports was bundled for free as a pack-in game for the Wii, and rightfully so. But I would argue even that game would have made more sense to sell separately than freaking Welcome Tour. Even Astro's Playroom, which is free with the PlayStation 5, even that game has more reasons to be a paid game. As well, there's actually some gameplay in it. Switch 2 Welcome Tour is an over-glorified user manual. There is literally no reason for that to be $10. None. Zero. I don't even see a reason or incentive to even purchase that game. There is also the third-party titles, but before I go into that, I want to first go into the hardware. There are the Joy-Con 2 controllers, and that aligns with everything that was leaked before. Bigger SL and SR buttons, connects magnetically, and it has mouse controls, which is something I see a lot of potential in. And the control sticks are going to be bigger. And well, for that, I am going to go into this next controversial thing that I'm going to bring up, and one that I'm sort of going to defend Nintendo a little bit on this one. But one piece of disappointing news that has been reported about the Switch 2 is that the control sticks are not going to use Hall Effect sticks. Hall Effect sticks, for those of you who don't know, is a type of control stick technology that uses like magnetic technology to help measure the positions of the control sticks. This helps correct the movement quicker and allows for less stick drift, which was very common for Switch 1 Joy-Cons. And there were patents that suggested that the Switch 2 Joy-Cons were going to use Hall Effect sticks, but Nintendo shut that down and confirmed that Hall Effect sticks are not happening with the Switch, with the Joy-Cons too. And although that's disappointing, I've seen a bit of hyperbolic discussion around social media and in certain YouTube videos where people believe that, well, guess this means that Joy-Con drift is not gonna be fixed with the Switch 2 after all. But hold on a minute here. We don't know that for sure. Yes, the news about it not using Hall Effect sticks is disappointing, but that does not mean that Joy-Con drift is still going to happen with the Switch 2 Joy-Cons. Nintendo has even confirmed that they have been rebuilding the Joy-Cons from the ground up, and that it's not going to be the same as the old Joy-Cons. And the Switch 1 controllers, like the Pro Controller, that did not have the same drift issues that the Joy-Cons did. So we are going to have to wait and see what happens. I mean, I don't know, maybe Joy-Con drift will still be a thing for the Switch 2, but the news of it not having Hall Effect sticks does not confirm that. So let's just calm down a little bit here. This doesn't confirm that Joy-Con drift is still going to be around. Personally, I would be more concerned if the control sticks to the Switch 2 is actually going to be comfortable, because that was my main gripe with the Switch 1's Joy-Cons, is that the control sticks felt kind of fragile, and well, that may have even been one of the big factors that led to Joy-Con drift to begin with. And then there is the C button, which was still a mystery before this Direct, and well, turned out it was for GameChat. I actually laughed at this part because of how this has been standard for the gaming industry for years. And they're making it out like it is this killer new feature to be excited about, when really it's like, welcome to 2013? And Nintendo even did have a voice chat with the Switch 1, but it was all tied to their app that you had to download on the phone, which crashes a lot, and you were better off just setting up voice chat through Discord. So, I am glad they finally brought over a native voice chat after being behind on that for so long, but how it's gonna work remains to be seen. There's also the Switch 2 camera, and while I like the idea of having a camera connected to the system, kind of giving it a Zoom call type of style, I'm not sure if I really see anybody actually using that. Plus, it has been confirmed that you can use any USB camera with the Switch 2, so there really isn't any reason to actually buy a Switch 2 camera, especially given much of the prices. We'll get to that in a little bit. There's also GameShare. Now this one seems to be one of the more underrated features, cause I do like the idea of this, and I feel like this one hasn't really been talked about much. But basically with this, you can actually share the game you're playing with a friend either online or locally on their Switch 2 system, or even have it shared on the original Switch system, even if the person using it does not actually have the game. So a little similar to the download play feature that was within the DS systems that Nintendo used to have. And there was a few Switch 1 games that did have a local wireless feature, particularly Mario Kart 8, but there wasn't really any more that expanded within that, which I thought was a shame, as I do think that that was a very underrated concept that never got fully utilized. And now for the part that I am most interested about, the hardware. And it was actually really surprising that they gave a real tech showcase during the Switch 2 Direct, because Nintendo usually does not talk about specs when it comes to their systems. They have the bigger screen, that's going to be 7.9 inches. Leaks said it was going to be 8 inches, so close enough, I guess. They also talked about resolution, and a lot of it is aligning with the specs that I have been hoping for. They not only mentioned that the system is going to be in 4K, which granted is just with the dock, it's still going to be in 1080p in handheld mode, but they also showed off the fact that it's going to be running at 120 frames per second. That I would not have expected them to mention at all, so that's great news. And other specs they mention, like the fact it's going to have HDR and all that, the Switch 2 is shaping up to be a beefy system. And it's lining up more and more to what I have talked about before in a previous video, and is going into the best case scenario as far as specs go. It's looking to use a variant of the NVIDIA T239 processor, and that would put the system hardware above the Xbox Series S. It's not going to be at PlayStation 5 levels of specs. That is not something that is realistic for a portable system without being so ridiculously expensive, which we'll get into pricing in a bit. But the specs are shaping up to be really good. Certainly more powerful than the Steam Deck, so that I am happy about. And nothing further demonstrates the system's power and capabilities more than the third-party titles they announced, cause it is a banger. As one of the third-party titles they announced was Elden Ring. That game alone should show the capabilities of the Switch 2, as that is a game that was really made for current generation systems. They also announced Street Fighter VI, the major game from Capcom, and that one is actually going to be getting its own amiibo figures. They also announced Borderlands 4 on the Switch 2, they announced Cyberpunk 2077, they announced the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and just so many huge titles. Some, I think, did come out for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but these are titles that I think shows this is not a super underpowered system we're dealing with here. This is not what you'd call a portable PlayStation 4. Like, yeah, I knew it would be somewhat last gen, but not so far last gen that it feels like too much. Hell, they even showed off an exclusive new IP from a third-party developer, in this case it's From Software, as they announced the Duskbloods. This is the type of third-party support I wanted to see in a Nintendo console for so many years. Definitely as far back as the Wii, but also given Nintendo's history of alienating third-party support, seeing the amount of third-party games being released for the Switch 2 is just incredible to see. And I think that is a very good sign for how capable the system is, as it is looking closer to the best case scenario of how powerful the Switch 2 is, in which it may be closer to the Xbox Series S in terms of capability. Now to go into the Switch 2's backwards compatibility, because this I find to be interesting, and one that may be confusing amongst 1,000 other different things about the Switch 2, so I'm gonna go over this part, as the Switch 2 is not exactly natively backwards compatible. This was something that was reported a bit later, was that Nintendo revealed that for Switch 1 games, it's gonna use a type of partial emulation. And I say emulation in a bit of a loose sense, as this is where things get a bit misleading, as much of the reports that report on this would say that it uses emulation. And when people see something like Switch 2 backwards compatibility is going to run off of emulation, that kind of makes it sound like the Switch 2 is going to be running its own equivalent of Yuzu or Ryujinx or any other open source Switch emulator that Nintendo has been issuing copyright takedowns on. But not exactly though. Because there's an Ask the Developer section on Nintendo's website that explains a little bit with basic context. But simply put, the Switch 2's hardware is a bit different than the Switch 1. And because of that, backwards compatibility is not achieved in the same way as, say, 3DS backwards compatibility with the DS, or Wii U backwards compatibility with the Wii, where the older hardware is still a part of the newer system. That's not the case with the Switch 2's backwards compatibility, and they even clarified in the section on their website that they did not want to use a software emulator because that would mean using up more of the battery, which, thank God, because the Switch 2's battery life is absolute garbage. So in order to achieve backwards compatibility, they're using some sort of translation layer that uses some Switch 1 DNA within the hardware. I'm assuming it's working with NVIDIA's current processor and connects with whichever NVIDIA Tegra X1 data that the original Switch has. I'm guessing this is something Nintendo's working with NVIDIA on, and I am interested in seeing about how this works. We don't know the full scope of it, but either way, I'm at least glad they gave some basic context on the translation layer aspect of it, because if they just say that it uses some form of emulation without elaborating on it, then that is likely going to spark more outrage and confusion, and God knows the Switch 2 does not need any more of that type of negative press. And then we get the Switch 2 editions. And this is the part in the Direct where I begin to have some mixed feelings. Now, I like the basic concept of Switch 2 editions. Some part of it was something that I was hoping we'd see out of the Switch 2, where they would upgrade some of the visuals and give things more of a boost in performance. Like the announcement of the 4K edition of both the open world Zelda games, both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, was something I wanted to see, as that has been confirmed to have enhanced frame rate and resolution, and it even supports HDR. And I know this is something definitely needed in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, as that game had moments where the game was struggling on even base Switch hardware. And I have a feeling that was a game that was in development with the Switch 2 in mind, which might be why they came out with these 4K editions. There's also the Switch 2 edition of Metroid Prime 4, and I like that they even showed off the game's resolution and frame rate in this, as they gave two different modes, a performance mode and a quality mode, as the game can actually run at 120 frames per second, but only in 1080p, or it can run in 4K but at 60 frames per second. But either way, you're going to be getting a solid frame rate in the Switch 2 version of Metroid Prime 4. This is the type of tech showcase that, again, feels unexpected for Nintendo. But I'm glad that they are showing that off, and it's even going to use mouse controls, which was something I was hoping that the Joy-Con mouse feature would utilize, as Metroid Prime 4's mouse controls would be perfect for this. And then there's some of the more gimmicky Switch 2 editions, like Jamboree TV, the Switch 2 exclusive mode for Mario Party Jamboree. This mode to me feels like a complete tech demo for the Switch 2, even more so than the Switch 2 Welcome Tour game, and it is absolute cringe. They have all these very gimmicky mini-games that uses the Switch 2 mouse controls and some other motion controls type of thing, and the worst part about it, moments involving the Switch 2 camera where they have Bowser live and the Switch 2 camera records you and actually shows you in the game. It looks so bad. It's giving me flashbacks, a bit of flashbacks to some of the really gimmicky games that the Kinect used to have for the Xbox 360. Because, I mean, you know, that too was essentially a camera, though that was more for motion controls that you use with your whole body, but some of the games on the Kinect felt pretty similar, where you had games like Rabbids Alive, Alive and Kicking, and the Michael Jackson Experience, where sometimes it might actually record yourself, and there's all this extra game stuff, that's a whole part of it, and you use your whole body all around. It was a gimmick. It looked awful then, and this Jamboree TV thing, it looks awful now. And then we get to the ultimate kicker of the Switch 2 edition games, and this part was actually revealed in the Direct, and I did not like it. If you own the Switch 1 versions and want to upgrade to the Switch 2 version, you gotta purchase an upgrade pack. Yes, an upgrade pack, in order to get what is, at the bare minimum, upgraded graphics and frame rate. Now, I can somewhat accept it for some of the DLC stuff like Kirby's Extra Story Mode, but for games that are like more upgraded performance in general, that doesn't sit right with me. Like, they are going the route of what Sony has been doing for PlayStation 4 users who own the PlayStation 4 versions of certain games and want to upgrade to the PlayStation 5 quote-unquote remastered versions. Well, not quote-unquote, they are remastered. And in many ways, these Switch 2 editions are worse than what Sony would be doing, because in the case of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the Switch 2 edition of that game, if you get the cartridge, does not come with the DLC expansion that was offered before. So they are still charging you a hefty price for the Switch 2 edition if you want to get the physical version, and on top of that, pay for the DLC packs from 2017 in order to actually get the full Breath of the Wild experience. Now, if there is one bright side that I will say about the upgrade packs, at least in the case of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, is that those upgrade packs are free if you have a Switch Online membership. So that's something at least. And given I have both Zelda games alongside the DLC and the Switch Online, well, I mean, at least I'm set for that. But yeah, the whole upgrade packs for certain Switch 1 games, I find that disappointing. And to charge even more money for the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild that doesn't even have the complete game, that's really shady. Just very shady. And that's a part of where, yeah, Nintendo is really starting to get a bit arrogant with the Switch 1 success. Also during the Direct, they announced more of the Switch Online for the Switch 2, and that's where they announced that GameCube is going to be coming to the Switch Online. Really though, I think when it comes to the GameCube Switch Online announcement, I think I am most interested in the GameCube controller. And this leads to the next piece of Switch 2 controversy that I wanted to tackle, and, well, sort of set the record straight on, as this is very confusing and misleading. And that is the fine print disclaimer that Nintendo put in the Nintendo UK version of the video announcement that says that this controller is only compatible with the GameCube Online app. And of course, adding that to the pile of Switch 2 controversies, this was reported a lot in articles and videos. Now, there is a sinister part of me that wants people to still believe in that, because that makes sure that maybe I can secure my hands on one. But no, I'm gonna be one to say this. That disclaimer doesn't actually confirm anything. Nintendo has had that same exact disclaimer on all their other Switch Online controllers for their classic systems. If you go on Nintendo's website and you look at the section that lists their classic game controllers, they all have the same disclaimer. The Super Nintendo controller has that disclaimer that says it only works on the Super Nintendo app, N64 controller only works for the N64 Online app, and so on. But that is actually not the case, because anybody that has actually tested these controllers on other Switch games, they actually work on there. Now, it might not always be practical to use it for certain other games, as the buttons are only mapped to the specific buttons that would otherwise read on with a standard Switch controller, and therefore there might be some games that would be unplayable with said controller, oftentimes in the case of older controllers that only have the D-pad. Then games that are more 3D based, like Mario Odyssey, would be unplayable with something like the Super Nintendo controller. And I did a little testing of this myself before I recorded this video. I tested my Super Nintendo NSO controller on other games like Mario Wonder and Shovel Knight, and it works great on there. But on a game like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, well, it does recognize the controller, but you cannot control Link at all in any way, shape, or form. And that renders a game like Breath of the Wild unplayable in that state. It's also the same if you use any other NSO controller as well. People have tested the Nintendo 64 controller with other games, and it's the same result. It works, but it's not necessarily like practical. I think Nintendo puts these disclaimers on there more so for legal reasons, mainly liability, because these controllers are not made for other Switch games. They're made specifically for the online apps. And guess what? Nintendo has confirmed themselves that the GameCube controller will work with other Switch and Switch 2 games. They clarified it will work with other games, but there may be issues. Again, likely referring to the lack of certain buttons in other Switch Online controllers. So, if you want to play Smash Bros. Ultimate with this controller, then rest assured, you should be able to. So now to go into a little bit more of the controversial aspects about the Switch 2, and that is the keycards. Now, this is the issue that I have probably been most back and forth about, and there has been some misinformation about it, as many believed in the beginning that every Switch 2 game was going to be doing this, and, well, that part isn't true. Their first-party games like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza is still going to use standard game cards. And when I looked more into the key cards, I was not completely against this, as I get the purpose for it. Games were going to be bigger, and there was going to be a lot of games that just wasn't going to fit on a standard game card. And this, on paper, seemed like a better solution than the way certain Switch 1 games would release, where either the partial game would be on the game card, with the rest being downloaded online, or they would just have the code in the box without a physical copy, which defeats the purpose. The game cards seemed like a way to compromise for that. And originally, when we got the original list that was confirmed to have game cards, I was okay with it, as there was still more physical game cards than key cards. But unfortunately, because developers want to cut costs, we're seeing more developers release games on key cards than on physical game cards, or in some cases, still only release the game in the physical box, which again defeats the purpose. What's going to happen with the key cards overall, we'll have to wait and see. On one hand, I get the reason for their existence, as it gives some sort of tangible feeling, of having a physical item, even though it's downloaded digitally. But this is another instance of how we're headed towards an all-digital future. But now to go into what is the biggest controversy of all, biggest topic, the pricing. I remember the morning I streamed the Direct, and that stream is still up. I was actually reacting to this part in real time as I finished the stream, and I was wondering, what price is this system going to be? Like, I thought it was so odd and strange that Nintendo didn't even mention the price to the system at all in the Direct. Like, they gave the release date, but they didn't mention pricing. And that actually sounds kind of deceptive in hindsight. And one of the last things I did in the last stream was looking up the price online, as it wasn't on Nintendo's website, and it would be reported like 10 or 20 minutes later that the console was going to be $450. Now, I will somewhat defend the console price because I am actually okay with it. The Nintendo Direct has shown that the Switch 2 is going to have a lot of beefy hardware packed into it. It's looking to be closer to the NVIDIA T239 processor that is rumored, and given that it's going to do HDR, gonna run games at 120 frames per second, and some games, like Metroid Prime 4, is actually gonna run in native 4K. Yes, there's gonna be a ton of games that isn't gonna run in native 4K, even current generation systems doesn't completely do that. But either way, I look at all that system power, and $450 is not really that outrageous for a system like that. Now, having said that, I can absolutely see why others would find that outrageous, because not everybody looks at specifics like that, and some may look at the price and, yeah, that $450 price point may feel like a sticker shock. Now, I will say that I was more hoping that it would be around $400. I feel they probably should have done that. That is around the price of the PlayStation 5, and the PlayStation 5 is looking to be the more consumer-friendly choice, given it's around 400 games that comes not just with the console, but also an actual free game. Referring to Astro's Playroom, that tech demo that is free with the system, and not freaking $10 like that Switch 2 Welcome Tour manual. I still refuse to call that a tech demo, by the way. Plus, also when it comes to Nintendo, they have had the reputation, sometimes for better or worse, of having affordable pricing. And even though I know personally, since gaming has been my hobby and passion, just how much beefy hardware is packed within the Switch 2, and I think the $450 price point is fairly reasonable, the average consumer doesn't look at that. Especially when you consider Nintendo's reputation of having affordable hardware, like the Wii was more affordable than the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, which made it appealing to consumers. Same with the 3DS, though that was more of a different market than the consoles were at the time, but still, gaming for under $200, even the Switch Lite was available for a little under $200. So even though I see how much system power the Switch 2 has, not everybody does. Most people out there are not gaming nerds like I am. Most people don't follow the leaks, and most people are not examining information about hardware and power. I mean, a lot of them are more like kind of casual-ish gamers who might buy the Switch because they're interested, or they might buy it for their kids, and they may feel the sticker shock if they see the $450 price point. Like, yeah, that can be a whole lot to swallow. And even if you tell them about phrases like, it's has 4K and 120 frames per second and HDR and what have you, all of that just might sound like useless buzzwords to them. And there is also the demographic that even might know about hardware power to a degree. Like, they might know about how capable the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X is, but may assume by default that the Switch 2 is underpowered, given that that has just been part of Nintendo's reputation. And it also doesn't help when there has been very contradictory sources, like Digital Foundry is saying that it's a portable PlayStation 4. Now, if that actually is the Switch 2's power, then yeah, $450 would be way too much for a system like that. But I don't think it is at the power of the base PlayStation 4, And also, people have used the argument for years that, oh, well, Nintendo's not all about powerful hardware. They're not all about graphics. They are all about the games. And I've even seen that argument used in the debate back before the Switch 2 was officially revealed, and we were just going by rumors and leaks. And I think that mindset has kind of been ingrained into people's minds, especially the younger generations. But the game pricing, oh ho ho ho. Yeah, I felt the sticker shock to this one. This is the part where the Switch 2 Direct felt particularly deceiving with the way they left out pricing. Cause Mario Kart World is gonna be $80. Yep, we have reached that point in gaming history. Now, one thing I will debunk on is that physical copies are not gonna be $90. That part is misinformation. It's still going to be $80 for both the physical and digital versions. But still, $80 for a game? That falls under yikes territory. And this is like the core part of it where I agree with much of the controversy, and that is, yeah, Nintendo's getting a bit greedy. And it isn't just with the games, it's also been with the accessories, and this has kind of had me thinking about a lot of this. And I'm getting the sense that Nintendo may be turning into the Apple of gaming. Now, I know people have made comparisons to Nintendo and Apple for years, and while I get where that's coming from, I never fully agreed with that. Like, yeah, Nintendo does kind of keep much of their hardware more on the exclusive side, though now they've been more lenient on that, and in many ways, both Nintendo and Apple had moments where it felt like they were out of touch and behind with the rest of the industry. Online gaming being an example in the case of Nintendo. But Nintendo still differentiated with Apple enough that had business practices that parallels with Apple in different ways. One of them is having more affordable hardware, sometimes for better or worse. I mean, I still think that them sacrificing hardware power with the Wii had more negative effects in the long term. But here, I am starting to feel like they're becoming more similar to Apple in the sense that they're putting a lot more emphasis on value and, well, having their products be more quote-unquote premium. Like, if you look at many of Apple's products over the years, they have been making some very overpriced premium accessories, such as the AirPods, which goes for over $100, or even the Magic Keyboard, which goes for well over $200. And another thing about the situation too that I think also has kind of led to Nintendo being closer to Apple, one part of it is, yes, I do think that they are getting very arrogant from the success of the Switch, which I'll get to in a little bit, but also a lot of it kind of feels a little similar to when Steve Jobs passed away. Now, that's not going into who Steve Jobs is as a person. I know he wasn't a very nice person in real life, but as far as his business goes, Apple became, well, more profit-driven and less innovative after Steve Jobs had passed away. Because one of Steve Jobs' strong points was that he revolutionized technology under his leadership as Apple. But when Steve Jobs passed away and Tim Cook took over, it was less innovative, they focused more on coming out with premium products, and even if it meant removing certain features. Like, Apple was one of the first to remove the headphone jack because they wanted to push the super premium Apple AirPods. And while most smartphone manufacturers did stick to keeping the headphone jack, eventually they too followed suit. Like, now if you were to get a Google Pixel phone, well, not gonna get a headphone jack, you're either getting Bluetooth or you gotta get a USB-C dongle. And with Nintendo, I feel like we're getting a similar effect of post-Steve Jobs Apple. Like, we had the passing of Satoru Iwata in 2015, who was Nintendo's former president. And while I did have some issues with some things of how Iwata ran Nintendo, mainly within much of the business sense, I think he tends to be a bit out of touch. But putting that aside, Iwata was somebody who is actually genuinely passionate about gaming and game design. And when he passed away in 2015, it was a shock. Like, one moment he was making business deals with DNA, that was the mobile gaming company that distributed some of their games on mobile, like Mario Run and Fire Emblem Heroes. That was under DNA. And the Switch was the last system in development under his run at Nintendo, and it's just one moment he was doing all that, and the next it was like he passed away. And even Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was president of Nintendo of America, his absence was also deeply felt when he stepped down. Now, yeah, he was a bit of a businessman, and may not have had, like, as much power as with Nintendo of Japan, but he has shown over the years that he loves what he does, and has helped with decisions like pushing for Wii Sports to be a pack-in game with the Wii. And that has been trending more because of that Switch 2 Welcome Tour manual software thing. Again, I think Wii Sports had more of a reason of being a paid game than Welcome Tour, but nonetheless, having Wii Sports being a pack-in game was a good decision. And also, he was known for for really his persona as well, and that was the thing about Reggie and Iwata, is that when you saw them in Nintendo Directs, they didn't just feel like corporate suits and ties. It felt like, yeah, they had personality, especially Reggie, and they did have their moments of, like, fake PR because, well, they are still there to sell their products. But, like, you remember the stuff they did with, like, the robot chicken thing involving Reggie? Or when they turned Reggie, Iwata, and Miyamoto into Muppet characters in promotion for Star Fox Zero? Like, they were highly recognized. The guys you see in the Switch 2 Direct, I don't know who any of these people are. I do not get anywhere near the same personality vibe that these guys, with these guys that you do with Reggie. Like, they really just feel like, at that point, corporate suits and ties. But point is, I think we're now starting to feel the effects of having Shintaro Furukawa replacing Iwata and Doug Bowser replacing Reggie. And Doug Bowser was a former executive at EA. And in a manner similar to what we're seeing with Tim Cook at Apple, we're now seeing at Nintendo. Like, overpriced premium products, that's Apple's doing. And the whole pricing situation has even had me notice, remembering one situation in particular that I think foreshadows what we're now seeing with the Switch 2. Does anybody remember back in October when Nintendo, out of nowhere, revealed and released an alarm clock? Yes, referring to Alarmo. Now, that was probably something that just about everybody forgot about, but I think it ties into it, because from the surface, it looks like a rather amusing novelty alarm clock, but then you check Nintendo's website, and you find that the alarm clock is $100! $100 freaking dollars for an alarm clock! I remember feeling the sticker shock to that, and that was not something that I thought about at the time. But looking back at it in hindsight, I think this ties to what we're seeing right now, that Nintendo is of the mindset of selling a bunch of expensive crap because, let's be honest, they are getting pretty arrogant. And we can also go into how many things about the Switch 2 does feel kind of samey. And that is another pattern that Apple products have been known for after Steve Jobs passed away. Now, the Switch 2 being a more powerful Switch, that I don't think is bad in of itself. In fact, that was something I was hoping they would do more than anything else. But much of the aesthetics does make it feel like just kind of samey. Even the colored Joy-Cons is kind of trying to give it a more like modern tech aesthetic by making it look like all black and such. The Joy-Cons just doesn't really feel all that colorful. And even the system menu doesn't look all that different. It still looks like a slightly tweaked up version of the Switch 1's menu. And I find that disappointing. Like, I was hoping that they would give it somewhat more of an identity. And I get that they wanted to keep things minimal with the Switch 2 menu and not use something where there is just too much happening at once before getting to the game, as with a device like that. Booting up a game should be, like, fairly quick and seamless. But there has been Switch homebrew menus that was made to give more life in the Switch 1 menu. And some would actually add themes and even music to help complement the system, and booting it up was still simple to do. Like even just adding themes to the Switch 2 menu, which I mean, I don't know, who knows? Maybe they will still do that. But the way it's looking right now, I don't think I dig the Switch 2 menu. And the eShop also doesn't have background music. Now, at least the good news with that is that it does look like they're changing the eShop up, because there's an Ask the Developer section on Nintendo's website that showcases this, and they talked a little bit about the Switch 2 eShop that allows you to see trailers for games that's recommended to you. And there's more we have yet to see about the eShop, but I will at least give them that for that they're seemingly improving the Switch 2's eShop. Either way though, the whole pricing thing is one thing I think ties into something I talked about with the worst case scenario video. Now, the basic fundamentals of the Switch 2, such as the hardware power and launch lineup, does fall under the best case scenario. Like the hardware power is looking towards what I was hoping for, and put that in the best case scenario, and the launch lineup looks pretty solid. Like, probably the strongest launch lineup I have seen in a Nintendo system since, I mean, possibly ever. But the part that I talked about in the worst case scenario video is the portion where I mentioned that Nintendo could possibly get arrogant with the success of the Switch. And that is what I think is happening right now. Now, I was kind of half right on that, because the way I predicted that would play out is that my framing of it was that they might regress to their Wii U decisions, where they might make the system like way underpowered and focus way too much on gimmicks. But the pricing though, that I did not see coming. And that wasn't entirely an unusual thing too, given that was something Sony was doing when they launched the PlayStation 3, where that was $500. Now that might not sound bad today, but in 2006, that is the equivalent of $800 to $900 when adjusted for inflation. And Nintendo also kind of did that with the 3DS, as that was originally $250, which doesn't sound bad until you consider that that was their successor to the DS. And with the Switch 2's pricing, again, console price is not bad, but game pricing, accessory pricing, yeah, that is where it really feels like Nintendo is getting arrogant. Like, right now the Nintendo brand has been the most successful it has been since arguably ever. Like, it has come so far since the Wii U, because not only do they have the success of the Switch, that is one of their biggest factors, but they now have their movie division. The Super Mario Bros. Movie was wildly successful, and they have a sequel that's coming out next year. And there's also the live-action Zelda movie that is in the works. Sort of skeptical as to how I feel about that one, but I guess we'll see what happens. And on top of that, they have their theme park attractions at Universal Studios, talking about Super Nintendo World, and that has been making a killing. So all of that combined, Nintendo's like in a position where they're like, we're on top of the world. They feel like they're untouchable. And because they see themselves as that, then they have become arrogant to the point where, hey, people will buy their products no matter what. Even if that includes just slapping their IPs on a $100 alarm clock, like, here you go. Now, if there is one thing in which I can kind of give them some small benefit of a doubt, and this is one that did like actually kind of have me take a little bit of a step back in terms of pricing, and that's the factor of inflation and the world economy. Because right now, shit's gotten expensive. Gas has gone up, food has gone up, many things that were cheaper about 5 years ago has gone up, and general wages has just not been keeping up enough to meet with inflation. Not enough to keep up with the cost of living, so a lot of that has been affecting electronics as well. So there is the debate as to whether or not games are priced higher because of inflation. And that is something I've been thinking about myself and putting into consideration. Now, personally, I am still leaning towards the fact that they are, like, being greedy for other reasons, like the fact that they're charging $10 for a digital manual, and that the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild doesn't come with the DLC, and the fact that they're selling a $100 alarm clock. Yeah, that alarm clock thing, I still can't get over that. But I've seen comparisons online to where certain games for the Switch 1 and previous generations can count for inflation, so I mean, that's just kind of like food for thought. Now, one thing I have seen online, and it's understandable too, is some may boycott the Switch 2 because of the expensive games and accessories, and that, you know, hoping Nintendo will take notice and lower prices. As much as I'd like to believe that it'll work, I don't think it will. Cause one, I don't think enough people are actually gonna do that. Even with the amount of controversy and outrage, I still think it's gonna do fairly well at launch. And two, even if the Switch 2 does begin to flounder in sales and starts to do like Wii U numbers or even early 3DS numbers, I'm still not sure if they actually would lower the prices because of inflation. In fact, I think if anything, we're more likely gonna see an increase of prices. That's gonna get to my next point. And yeah, this next point is one that could negatively affect the Switch 2 by a whole. And that is tariffs. Yeah, tariffs that is imposed by President Donald Trump. I don't want to go too much about this. I don't want to bring politics to my channel. So really the main focus on this is going to be how this is going to affect the Switch 2 as Nintendo delayed the pre-orders of the Switch 2. It was originally going to be April 9th, and that the pre-orders were going to go up. And then Trump announced that he was going to start putting tariffs on all the countries. Again, not to go too much into that, but Nintendo delayed the pre-orders because of that, and it was looking like a possibility that the Switch 2 was going to go up in price. Nobody knew what was going to happen for certain. It just, everything was looking pretty uncertain all around, and because of this, then yeah, it was looking like a real possibility that the console was going to go up in price. Now, thankfully, pre-orders did eventually start getting a new date, and that is April 24th. And the good news is that the price to the console is the same. It is still $450. I still think that's reasonable, but again, I understand why the general consumer wouldn't see it that way. And games are still priced the same, for better or worse. I mean, Mario Kart World is still $80. But now they started raising the prices of the accessories, and that may be the beginning of where tariffs may start affecting things on the Switch 2. Because the accessories are now $5 more expensive than they were before the initial delay on pre-orders. Some things like the Switch 2 camera, which was $50, is now $55. Only reason I'd ever be interested in that is because I'd be curious if the video quality is good, but $55 is not terrible for standard webcam pricing. But other Switch 2 accessories like the Pro Controller is $84. That's a yikes right there. Even $80 was outrageous. And the Joy-Con controllers, if you get the extra pair, is $95. That is insane. So yeah, things are getting pretty expensive with the Switch 2. Some things I think is on Nintendo, some things I do think is related to the economy and tariffs and all that. So now with my mind being wrapped around it, and I'm sure there are some details I'm missing, there's just too much to process about the Switch 2, but having said that, am I still going to pre-order the system? Well, it was something I went back and forth about, and if there is one bright side to the April 9th pre-order delay, is that it gave me more time to think about it. But I think the overall answer is yes. I am gonna try to pre-order the system, though this video is probably gonna be up after pre-orders are already up, since this is a long-ass video and therefore a lot to edit. But I think I am still going to pre-order the system. That is to say, I'm gonna try to put in a reserve as soon as my local GameStop opens, as I do want to attend the midnight release and all that. My main reason for ultimately still going with the decision of pre-ordering the system is a few things. One, although the system is still $450 as of right now, that may not last. The economy is just already so unstable. Things involving tariffs is unpredictable. One moment Trump wants to put tariffs on, and next moment he pauses them, so there's that aspect. And I still think that $450 is not a bad price for the console. Granted, I am going to try to go for the Mario Kart World Bundle, because, avoid paying $80 for that one. But either way, the console may not stay at $450, so there is a chance that that's going to go up, right after release. So pre-ordering it might be a good idea for that reason alone. Second reason is because, despite all of the controversy and much of the greed going on about the Switch 2, Nintendo does seem to be going more the route of modern-day Apple, but nonetheless, I am still interested in the Switch 2. I think the basic fundamentals of it, they're knocking it right out of the park. The system is looking to be beefy and powerful, and that has been bringing about a whole set of third-party support for the Switch 2. And I do like their launch lineup. Mario Kart World looks good. Games like Metroid Prime 4, I'm more interested in playing on the Switch 2. Their hardware capabilities and lineup of both first-party games and third-party titles is looking up. And I think if this were any other console generation, that would make it a slam dunk for Nintendo. But there are still a few caveats to where it may not end up being a slam dunk for Nintendo. Now, I know there has been some who believe that because of all that Nintendo is doing with the Switch 2, that this system's gonna end up being a Wii U style failure. I don't think it's gonna be that. At least not when we're going based off the basics. Cause one, I think there's just so many other different factors to what led the Wii U to being such a failure that I don't see that repeating with the Switch 2. So even adding aspects involving greed and making things overpriced for their own decisions, I don't think that is going to make it a Wii U type of failure. I think worst case scenario when it comes to that is that they might suffer a similar fate that Microsoft took with the Xbox One, where that system had a disastrous reveal and launch, particularly with Don Matrick running the Xbox division, and trying to push more for entertainment and trying to do always online check-ins. And even when Phil Spencer took over the Xbox division, he did try to make things better for the system, but the ghost of Don Matrick still was haunting them. And the Xbox One, although it did still do well, it was behind compared to the PlayStation 4, and that was because of how much their reputation was a bit hindered because of the Xbox One reveal. So I think we may see something similar with the Switch 2, where their own ghost is going to come back to haunt them. It's probably still going to sell well, but not the gangbusters amount that the original Switch was selling. That's, of course, if we're going by the basics. But the thing that I think could potentially destroy the Switch 2 is essentially the economy. Once again, tariffs. As the Switch 2 might not stay at $450, it might get even more expensive. Now, even though I still think $450 is reasonable, anything pushing past maybe $500 is kinda where things start to fall under yikes territory. And if the system is priced at $600 because they just don't have a choice but to do so, that could really hinder the Switch 2 any success that system could have. That's so many factors, so many variables. And with that, those are my thoughts. And yeah, I do think that they are heading towards being more like the Apple of gaming, just in terms of pricing. And I gotta say that I do actually feel a little better doing this video, cause now that I was able to bring all my thoughts about it into this one place and just give what the overall picture is, I feel just a little better because that was just kind of overwhelming. And I'm glad to have gotten out just what I wanted to say. And I still plan on getting the system. I am still interested. If there is one other advice I have to those who are interested in the system but wants to boycott prices and all that is, if you still want to get the system at the regular price, you can also still not support the games that are expensive. Like, with the Mario Kart World, I'm planning to get the bundle, because, like, that's more the price that it should be, but other $80 can be purchased used if they're even on physical copies. And that even includes key cards, since they are still resellable. And so with that, what did you guys think? Do you still plan on getting the Switch 2? And are you just going to hold off on it because of just everything that involves it? Let me know in the comments below, and subscribe to DSL Media for more content. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.